Hello, everyone out there. Welcome to our San Juan Citizen Lights May Scoop. And since I'm accustomed to audience participation, we're going to have to fake it here a little bit here. But if you get excited, kind of like whatever, throw your hands up in the air. Just, yeah, like Marlena just did there, you know, kind of show a little fun. Anyway, great to have everyone on here. Someone give me a, Marcel, you hearing me okay? Good volume wise?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks. So let me just introduce myself to begin with. Whoops, we got a different screen there, Marcel.
Oh, sorry about that, hold on. I got kicked for some reason.
Life in the age of Zoom.
There we go.
Okay, great, thanks. So hello, everyone. I'm just going to do a quick intro of myself. Yeah, Jimbo Buickerood. I've worked for the Alliance for almost 14 years. We used to have an office in Cortez. I was over there for a while and now in Durango, and I live up the valley in Hermosa. And kind of the territory that I ride, so to speak, for the Alliance is all the way from Wolf Creek Pass to the Utah border, and then from the New Mexico line, the 37th parallel on up to the divide. So that's the territory that I try to pay attention to. And I've received a lot of questions like, well, actually, what do I work on? And though we're going to talk about forest issues tonight, forest fire watershed issues, I work also on oil and gas issues, every kind of fossil fuel issues in Southwest Colorado. My colleague Mike takes the point on that in New Mexico. I work on cultural and historic preservation issues in Colorado, in Southwest Colorado. I work on a lot of lands protection measures, both administrative and legislative. Work on travel management and recreation issues. And this is just for all these, this is both on San Juan National Forest land and BLM land. So primarily on federal lands, though sometimes I'm involved in state land issues as well. And work on grazing issues on the federal lands, both permits for and grazing allotments for sheep, domestic sheep and cattle. And I work on ski area expansion development proposals. So basically those type of business or corporate uses of business of our public lands, I pay attention to those as well. So tonight I'm going to talk about our forests, and these are very much our forests. You know, our forests have really become, what's going on with them in many ways has become a topic of conversation that's much more prevalent and a greater concern, et cetera, than it has been for a long time or maybe ever. And a lot of this has to do with the rapidly changing realities on our forest. So we'll get into that. Just so you know, I'm not, I don't have a BS or an MS or a PhD in ecology, forest ecology, fire ecology, silviculture, or forester. You know, I work, I come to these issues from land management perspective, policy perspective, and basically trying to move the Alliance's mission forward related to you know, the land, air, and water here in the Four Corners area. And then, you know, though I don't have those specialties, I spend a lot of time on the forests. I spend a lot of time with stakeholders, workshops, tours, just many issues, much time related to forest issues. And then I read as much research as I can. Of course, there's an inexhaustible amount of research, but I try to keep up on the reasonable amount of research that relates to things we're working on. So let's proceed, Marcel, please. So as a note, here's the Alliance's mission, you know, and you know, we find that all these issues with our public lands and watersheds and so forth are all woven together in just the well-being of our communities in many ways, all with kind of a ecological framework to the situation. Next. And so, you know, this title reflects on, you know, my take, you know, conservationist point of view of what's going on the forest here. And, you know, I will say that, you know, the Alliance, we try to be solutions based in our engagement on public lands. It's not always kumbaya. And, you know, but I would say in the forest realm, we have avoided the need for any type of, you know, litigation type of activity for a long time. So that's, I think that's good. And hopefully we can keep it that way for a while to come. Next. So what I find out a lot of times is that when people talk about our forests, they're kind of generalized. And, you know, it just, we have to be a little more specific on our information, our understanding of forest here when we talk about what's going on with forest. So, you know, you often see this in misinformation. You see it from elected officials, et cetera, who like just say, you know, wrap it all up to, we need to do this with our forests. Well, you know, what something you do to some forest, as far as whatever, prescribed fire or harvest or whatever, you know, may be totally the wrong approach to another forest type. So it's just important to know your forest is what we're saying here. So let's go ahead, Marcel. So the Pinion juniper forest, whoops, go back, sorry, I got these photos later on there. Pinion juniper forest. So these are the 6, and I'm going to throw in the tundra conifers. So the Pinion juniper forest, they're the, you know, lower elevation forests around here. But you know, they're a whole world into themselves, whole ecosystem into themselves. Then there's Ponderosa. So the Ponderosa belt on the San Juan runs, you know, kind of in the 6,500, 8,500 foot range all the way across southwest Colorado. And then there's, you know, there's the mixed conifer forest, which tends to be, I kind of like it because it's the most diverse. And officially there's warm, dry mixed conifer, and there's cool, moist mixed conifer. So the difference is, like if you look in the photograph behind me in my virtual world here, you see that's mostly Ponderosa, right? If you go up to a little bit higher elevation, you're probably going to pick up some Douglas fir. So that becomes a warm, dry mixed conifer forest. And if you move around to either go up elevation or move around to a cooler, more moist realm, then you're going to pick up maybe blue spruce. You might pick up white fir. So that's where you start to pick up your mixed conifer forest, and you move from dry to moist. And of course, as you get up higher, you're going to like, oh, the aspens want to get in there, even though they're not conifers, they'll be involved. And then you still get up higher, and you'll get into subalpine fir and some Engelmann spruce even before you really get into the spruce fir. So it's, remember, everything is gradational. It's not like this is, you know, this is there's a distinct line between this and that. You know, everything in nature just kind of grades in and grades out. So it is with the forest types. And then there's aspen, and you know, we all know that aspens can be a sort of a standalone situation. It's a pioneer species, comes in after disturbance, avalanches, fire, other kinds of disturbance. And then I did not want to leave out the cute little conifers that are up in the tundra area, which are often called krumholtz, you know, and lots of times they're spruce and sometimes maybe a little fir in there. But, you know, I didn't want to forget those sort of alpine forest type of thing, different than alpine forests are, say, in Alaska. Yeah, so, okay, next. Anyway, so one of the things I want to do today is encourage you to get into our forests. Okay, there is, like, forests are cool. I mean, there's so much to discover and learn, and you know, you need a lifelong learning project. You got it with forests. But I'm just going to pick out one little incident here where I was roaming around in the forest over in the Piedra watershed, and I'm always looking what's going on out there. And I was like, wow, look at this. This is a whole interesting kind of fun way of going about reading tree rings. Next. So I found a white fir, a big fir that had collapsed and started to degrade, you know, decompose. morph into its next next carbon structure, I should say. And I was like, wow, look at this. I can count tree rings this way. And, you know, I'd never really seen that before. And it was just an example to me that all the surprises are out there. If you go out in the forest and, you know, be observant, you will see, you see such things. Every time you go out there, there's something else. So this is a white fir. I don't have the whole tree right there, but I was like, ah, this is cool. I'm counting rings. Next. And then as I poked around a little bit more, I found kind of the rest of the story here. And this seems a little bit odd being I was up in the middle of nowhere, but this was evidently cut at outfitters camp. It probably was dead, and so they wanted to cut it as a hazard tree. But this is a white fir. And once you know, one of the fun things is getting out there, getting on your hands and knees, getting out maybe your reading glasses if need be, or your hand lens, and look and see how old a tree is like this. So you often see these. This is a white fir, you know, it's like it was lost count after 250 or something like that. Anyway, it's just there's lots of fun things to see out there, and I always now carry a tape with me so I can measure circumference of trees. I'm getting into the kind of the champion tree situation. So next. So just zipping through these quickly here. So Pinion juniper, you know, our low elevation forest. Won't get into a lot of details. It sort of morphs out of the shrubland, and then as you get higher elevation, it goes into Ponderosa next. And so Ponderosa, I mentioned, is all the way across Southwest Colorado. So this is kind of, I would say this is something that was probably a more typical situation, you know, before fire suppression compared to what we see now. You see very open forest here. This is in a wilderness location where fire has been let run its course. And so you see that it's a pretty open forest here. Not much undergrowth. In the background, you can see some regeneration of younger Ponderosa. But once again, the Ponderosa is a very, you know, prevalent forest across this, and it's a fire adapted forest, okay? So fire adapted means it's in its natural ecological niche that fire is a part of the system in which keeps it healthy, okay? It thins it, you know, it runs some, if you have lower medium severity fire, it runs fire up the trees, so you have light into the forest below. You don't have too much competition between a lot of trees in one locale. And then I also note here that often in Southwest Colorado, we see gamble oak mixed in with that. And a lot of people get a little freaked out about gamble oak, but hey, it's gamble oak. It has a home too. And it actually integrates a lot with the Ponderosa. And most likely there's some symbiosis between Ponderosa and gamble oak, even if we don't understand it entirely so. And maybe it's not, the symbiosis isn't always what we might consider to be a happy situation. But anyway, gamble oak is often a piece of the Ponderosa forest here, though not other locales, but Southwest Colorado, that's the case. Next. Warm, dry, mixed conifer. Remember, we get a few, if you look in here in the foreground, you'll see some Doug fir mixed in here. So we start to get into mixed conifer. And then as it gets more moist, we add in white fir and blue spruce. And that moves it into the cool, moist conifer next. And as we move up in the cool, moist conifer, you know, gain some elevation. Though this location isn't that high, you start to have some spruce mixed in, and eventually aspen are sneaking in. Of course, aspen, you know, they need some nice open territory, some sun to get going here. So you can see on the edge of this meadow here that they're becoming part of the cool, moist, mixed conifer forest, even though they're, of course, not a conifer. Next. And then up higher, we get spruce fir. And though most of our spruce is Engelmann spruce here, when we get up high, there's the firs, there's subalpine firs, most common, but there's a couple firs up high here. So this is our common higher elevation forest here. And so just a reminder that ecologically speaking, this is a very different situation than the Ponderosa and other forest types. And I'm especially contrasting here with the Ponderosa because, when you're talking about concerns about fire hazard and so forth that you're trying to deal with around communities, spruce fir is a very different situation. So the situation they have in Telluride, they have in Lake City, they have Silverton, so forth. That's very different than the area around, Pagosa Springs, around Dolores, outside of Durango, and so forth. So just remember that piece. Next, and of course, Aspen. And this is the perfect or the kind of classic Aspen sense situation here. This is looking up Missionary Ridge. So this is after the Missionary Ridge fire. So which is 2002. So that's what the Aspen has done in like 18 years or so. And of course, that's the pioneer species. It'll come in here. Some places the Aspen will stay longer term, but generally speaking, with the conifers will start moving in here. And even if you look in this photograph, you'll see, wow, some conifers actually survived the fire, and those will become the seed source for the conifers that will grow up within the Aspen, right? Those conifers like that little shade, a little moist environment, and they'll start growing up, and over time they'll shade out the Aspens, and the Aspens will, fade away, except in certain areas, so they'll exist here. But that's the cycle we go through there after fires, or as I said, like an avalanche shoot or another disturbance event. Okay, next. And this, as I said before, I couldn't pass up all these cute little conifers that are up in the tundra. These aren't quite Krumholtz. When you get up the mountain there, you have the Krumholtz, or the kind of deformed littler ones, and otherwise you just have kind of England spruce moving up the hills. Next. So here's the question: why should we pay attention to this? Now, this little memo I put up here is fortunately something from last year. We had a different federal administration, but beware, we have had this same situation, 20, 30 years ago, and it could be here in the future. And basically, you look at this, this is a memo from Secretary of Ag Perdue, who's in there in the Trump administration. And if you look at this, it's like increasing productivity of national forests and grasslands, valuing our national heritage, grazing heritage, national grasslands, increasing access, expediting environmental reviews. So as we can see here, there's nothing that really pays attention to the basis of it all to keep it healthy, resilient, resistant, and so forth, which is the ecological well-being of the situation. If you're not paying attention to that, you're in the long term, you're not going to have productivity of it for anything, right? So, but this is sort of as my colleague Mike says, this is sort of a commodity approach to the national forest, or as we can see, to our public land. So hopefully we're moving beyond that, but this is why we should pay attention, because there's a need for us to involve ourselves in these decisions that are being made on the forest. Next. Okay, so I'm going to run down here this list, and I'm going to be talking fairly quickly just to move us along here. The first bullet there, the way I look at it, forests are a watershed. It's just an interchangeable reality here in the Mountain West, right? You take care of the watershed, that's taking care of the forests, and vice versa. So they're one and the same, as we all know, the statistics of what is it like, there's 19 or 20 or whatever states in the West that all derive their water from the headwaters of somewhere in Colorado. So, and that's forested land for the most part. Second bullet, so climate, okay? It's like driving the train. And that's why there's so much change and disturbance on the environment. And that's why, frankly, we're needing to pay attention in a big way, because some of this is challenging for our anthropocentric world, and so how do we deal with that? And also, do we have the opportunity to kind of reset our forest to a more resilient restored state? That's the other question there. So conflicting interest, I mean, as always, you know, on our public lands, I mean, they're multiple use mostly, or a lot of them are, but, you know, it's not, as I said before, it's not always a kumbaya moment. You know, people have their different interests and needs and so forth they put forward. So trying to work out something that works for communities, you know, kind of an economic and social sense, and also keeps the ecological processes working is, you know, that's the spot we're looking for. But it's not easy because these things are very complex questions, a lot of moving pieces, a lot of unknowns right now with climate change. Landscape scale. So remember that the forests are there, you know, the forests, they don't stop at the fence line, they don't stop at the county line, they don't stop at the state line, right? They're just there across their forests, and even though, I mean, across the landscape, and even though they change, you know, elevationally through species, you know, when you go across on the same elevation, you're talking about, you know, the forests that go across borders and so forth. So working across jurisdictions for management is a challenge, as it often is with many things. So that is a huge challenge that we're taking on, and I think we're actually doing a pretty good job with it. But you need to look at it in the large scale, right? You need to look at it across the landscape. Science. So, you know, trying to make science-based decisions. There's still a lot of stuff we don't know, especially with climate, and it's ever evolving. And so what we're really trying to do is keep folding that science back in to make informed decisions. And, you know, thank goodness there's scientists out there, people out there who are really digging into it and, you know, trying to solve some of these, or give us some information to help us make some decisions, because, you know, we need it. We need those to make accurate decisions looking forward. So monitoring and feedback loop, that's kind of relates to science there, but in a little more specific way, we need to learn from what we're doing by monitoring very specifically, and decide what's the best thing to monitor, and then take that information, feed it back, and to adapt the way we're managing. And then there's the sort of effective realm. It's like, oh, these are our forests. They're important to us. They're places where we, you know, rekindle our souls, recreate, and so forth. So that is a whole piece that we need to fold in here too. And overarching goal, healthy ecological function. So just to point this one again, it's like, we won't get anywhere with any of these things, you know, whether you want forest products, or you're hoping to recreate, or you want water for your farm, or on and on and on, unless we're paying attention to the ecological function. If it's not ecologically functional, you know, then you know, what we're working on now is trying to restore that, reset that. But if we're not paying attention to that, we're not going anywhere. We have seen many realities of that in this country and elsewhere in the world, where we have not, you know, we've done the fast approach, the profit approach, and so forth like that, and we're paying for it. Next. So, you know, just to highlight, I'd say, you know, since I've been with the Alliance, the issue of forest, fire, and watershed has really heightened, you know, and as I said before, a lot of it's been client driven, but I'm using two examples here. One from last Friday. So on the right-hand photograph, this is here at the Smiley Building lawn, and that is Senator Hickenlooper in the back. You can kind of see me in the dark blue vest gesticulating. Trying to make, that's me, trying to make a few points, probably having to do with ecological function, leading the way in science-based and so forth. But this was a meeting with county commissioners from southwest Colorado that met with Senator Hickenlooper, and there's, you know, president of the college, some people from industry, and it was a discussion about, you know, what concerns do we need to really address here having to do with forest, fire, and watershed here across the state, and specifically in southwest Colorado, and a lot about what we're doing. And we are doing a lot. And then in the other photograph, on the left-hand photograph, that's Senator Bennett in the middle there. I'm in the blue mask person to his right there. And this is outside of Pagosa Springs. And this is on Reservoir Hill above Pagosa Springs, where we've done some treatments there in the Ponderosa adjacent to town for a number of reasons. And this, Michael Bennett's been interested in forest issues for a long time. He's sponsoring some important legislation now having to do with funding for community-based forestry projects. So anyway, I'm just heightening that this is, these are important issues, how we fund these things, what policy is, what our guidance is, if they're science-based. There is a lot going on here. Next. Okay, as I noted before, climate is driving a lot of things that are changing the forest. So, and those are generally called disturbance, disturbance factors. And we all know, unless you've been really hiding in your COVID foxhole for even more than a year, that things are changing around us. Generally here in Southwest Colorado, we talk like, oh, when you go over Wolf Creek Pass, this is what it looks like, or when you go, when you go out towards the Canyonlands, here's what you look for. So just quickly, insects. So endemic is just the background, kind of population of insects, but now we've really in these epidemic portions, we have a lot of insects out there. And every tree needs its own insect, at least one. So just know that it's just not, we see it maybe in Engelmann spruce up high, but it's certainly all the other forest types and so forth have beetle challenges, insect challenges as well. Fire, I think everyone's aware that our history of fire suppression in the last 100 or so plus years has come back to haunt us. Smoky has its place, but I proposed to the Forest Service that we also need another creature, maybe I'd like to call him Blaze, who would be a fox, who would be our prescribed fire creature, who would go around and help us with, prescribed fire that puts fire back on the landscape. So as the fire regime in the Ponderosa, we have a series of, fires are there in a kind of regular interval, 5, 15, 20 years. That's the healthy regime in the Ponderosa around here, but they've been suppressed, and so we don't have kind of a natural, so to speak, forest. Disease, once again, due to dryness, we have more disease in some trees, and then there's been a lot of physical disturbances. And you look at these and you go like avalanche, well, we're getting such, last year was a huge avalanche year, not this winter, the winter before. And we get such oscillations with climate change, and we just had these mega winters. So mega avalanches, which are problematic in a lot of ways, including great breeding grounds for beetles. Anyway, and then there's been, so physical disturbance is another disturbance factor. And some of it is, a lot of this is, hard to say, but most of it's self-inflicted. Next. And just looking at fires here quickly, this is over in the Piedra area. This is the Little Sand Fire in 2012 or 2013. It was one of those nice slow moving fires that left a mosaic on the landscape. There was some high severity, mixed severity fire, a lot of low severity. And so you have an incredible regeneration of carbon and nutrients in that area, especially nutrients. And it's not a fire that it was near infrastructure, property, homes, or something like that. So it's a pretty happy, it's like 50,000 acres or so. Very large fire, but in a place where we could mostly just let it burn. And it's doing incredible habitat improvement work. And there's a great, I'll try to tell the story really quickly, a very great story about that there was a mule deer, excuse me, a collared mule deer that lived within the perimeter of the fire. The 6 weeks the fire was really burning most actively. It just wandered around in the fire because it's a mosaic, and so it doesn't burn everywhere. So this radio collared deer was actually just moving around in that area during that time. And so you need to think about, different types of fires. This is not a stand replacement fire. It was not near close to town. It was a healthy situation that will bring added resilience to this forest over time. Next. This is a fire a little bit closer to home. This is this is from the 416. In the 416, even though most of the 416 fire within the perimeter did not burn or it was low severity, there were definitely places of high and mixed severity. This is in Trip Creek Gulch outside of Hermosa, and you can see there's some fairly high severity here. High severity is defined when 80% or more of the stems are burnt. So when you have this type of situation, you have some challenges certainly to the communities, to infrastructure and so forth. And once again, most of this is rooted in suppression of fires, and the other thing is in the reality that climate is changing. And so remember, the important thing about fires is it's what's going on during that event. It's mostly a weather issue, right? That's what's going on. So if you have hot, dry, low fuels and so forth, that's what's drawing it. Just because you have a dry forest out there doesn't mean it's going to ignite, but you need to have the weather event that supports that. But you can see across the valley, on the far side there, you can see up where the Missionary Ridge fire is, and there's still a lot of open patches there, but the Aspen's also coming back in here, and in Trip Gulch, it's recovering now, though there's not aspen in this particular location we're looking at. So just remember, there's just a variety of fires, different severity, different outcomes, a natural part of the landscape. It sure would be nice if they weren't too close and damaging to our infrastructure, but that's some of the things we're working on these days. Next. And, just to give a quick snapshot of how severe fires can be. This one's a little bit close to my heart here. This is what was the largest, the champion Douglas fir in the state of Colorado until the 416 fire. And so you can see, going back to what I mentioned before, that fire was taking place during a very hot and dry, start, when it started in June 1st, 2018, because you can see this tree right in front of us, this big Doug fir. It didn't have any branches near the ground at all, right? But the fire was so hot and the winds were moving in such a way and so forth that you had flame length that went up and reached way up in this tree, and and killed it. Next. So I think I've hit upon all these points, that how climate change is changing the situation. Remember, we have less snow. Albedo has to do with the reflection of heat off the ground. So that's all that is changing. And I think I've talked about most of these points here, but I will just emphasize the point that the climate models that are being done by Forest Service and other research are indicating that we could have huge loss of forest type. For example, the Ponderosa, according to some models, will be mostly gone in some decades from now due to a drying and warming forest. So how do you work with that? It's very challenging situation, because we don't know a lot of things, and it's there's research and we're trying to get smart and do things best, but thinking 100 years into the future, that's what you need to do as a forester, and we need to do as the public, trying to gauge things is definitely a challenge. Next. So I've mentioned restoration a number of times here. And so what is restoration? Because how do we restore a forest that is not going to be the forest that, the future forest is not going to be the forest of the past, right? Okay, we get the handle on turning climate change around. We're still in here for a longer period of warm and dry, and that's just going to change the situation out there. So what was called historical range of variability, that HRV of what was out there as far as fire intervals go, what the species composition and so forth like that. Well, that may have been true 10 to 100 to 200 years ago, but that's not where we're going now. So this challenge ahead of us here is what do we do as far as out there, as far as forest treatments, thinning, mastication, logging, or nothing at all that brings us back to a forest that is a restored forest, okay? And then, what is the restored forest? So the two terms we're really looking at is we want a forest that's more resistant. So that means that it's more resistant to, say, beetles and to fire. So it's more resistant, and then we want to be more resilient. So that resilience is its ability to bounce back should there be future disturbance events, which there will be, of course. Next. So we don't have too many more slides here. I just wanted to let you know some of the things that are going on these days here. I mean, there's some big projects going on regionally, and there's projects going on in the Forest Service throughout these various districts here. Next. So let's just, we have a couple maps here. This is sort of looking across the whole San Juan National Forest, actually looking, even further over in the San Luis Valley on the right side, and looking up, all the way up almost to Dove Creek on the left side there. But there's a couple of big projects going on here that I guess the good news in these are their collaborative efforts amongst federal, tribal, state, private entities, pretty much everyone at the table trying to figure out the way forward with our forest, right? How to bring them to where they're more resistant and more resilient. And we do have this challenge with some fairly densely stock populated or many stemmed forests that we're working with now, right? Because we haven't had fire. That's been the biggest problem. And that's mostly about the Ponderosa, but mostly this is a kind of little bit of busy map here, but I just wanted to let you know there's some projects going on here. And then next. And then if you look at the top of this slide here, Southwest Colorado Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program. So that acronym or initials are CFLRP. So there's 2 CFLRPs coming to you in the San Juan National Forest. They'll start soon here, and they'll be around for 10 years. And so they're a federal project with some federal funding, and they have to do with trying to integrate all those type of needs that we are trying to address around here, which is working with the wildland urban interface and protecting infrastructure and watersheds and important recreation sites and providing some economics, as we remove forest products from the forest products from the forest. So trying to weave all those things together. That's what we've been working on. Next. And this is, we'll just do short time in this slide here, but you can see some of these things. There's a lot of federal money. A lot of it is also trying to weave together local resources, state stuff, and I think we're getting somewhere because there's a greater awareness of the concerns. Next. This is just a quick snapshot here of anyone can go look at this in any day. This is the schedule of proposed action from the San Juan National Forest. It describes, these aren't 2 forest projects that were shown here, but if you can go in there anytime and see what kind of projects are going on our national forest. I just want to bring your attention to that. So I try to look at all of these, become in all of these, I know the territory, provide comments, input on the situation. Next. I think we covered most of these, but these are the issues that we're trying to address. I think maybe I haven't mentioned wildlife so much. We're also trying to fit them into this happy puzzle, which is, how do we take care of wildlife as far as their habitat needs? And, I would say it's a little easier with terrestrial habitat it is than aquatic habitat. I mean, the trout in these streams where there's, not just where there's fires, but where the water's heating up and there's less water, we're in significant hurt for trout species, for example. But those are kind of the issues that we're trying to blend together to come out with a decision of how to move ahead in a smart way. Next. So that little green, see the little green right there in the middle? You know, the question is, does that exist, right? And I will say that that is, you know, working for the Alliance, I'm trying to find that green spot. Okay, and so that is you know, I think it's a small target, I would say, you know, so we're trying to balance, you know, everything, all those things I pieced that we're trying to keep the ecological function going. We're trying to protect infrastructure, houses, infrastructure, whatever that's in the wildland urban interface, the WUI, so-called WUI. You know, while we're working on all this, it would be great if there's some economic benefit for our community. We need to take care of our water resources. You know, so we need to enter the forest to do some treatments or harvest, but if we do too much or the wrong species or the wrong age class, we might blow it. So I think there's a sweet spot. It's hard to find, and it's a very small little niche in there. But I think that's what I would say that I'm working on. And, you know, I think most of my partners in the stakeholders, the watershed, forest, and fire stakeholders across Southwest Colorado, and that's what we're trying to find. Next. And just so you know that I'm not just kicking around the office all the time reading research, you know, we spend a lot of time on the landscape in these collaboratives out looking at what's going on in the forest. And this is north of, where are we here? We're north of Mancos, we're north of 184, looking at the forest here, looking at fuel break and, you know, all kinds of issues here and how the selection of trees for cutting and saving and so forth like that. But just know that there's a lot of people spending a lot of time on the ground, looking around at how best to do things. And I try to be out there as much as I can. Next. So I think pretty much gone through most of these, you know, the sweet spot, those are the points we're looking for. I will say going down the last bullet, the carbon, 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 carbon. I will say that's probably my biggest concern is that we're not paying close enough attention to that because, you know, ecological function is important, but we're not paying attention to the carbon, the whole carbon footprint, sequestration, so forth. Then we're going to lose, you know, big ball of wax anyway, right? And it's easy to say, oh, we're going to go harvest, you know, cut some trees in the woo, you're putting a fuel break and so forth, but we're not thinking about the carbon and what that carbon balance is and what we're taking out and what's going to be still there and how much carbon is going to be sequestered and what species are going to help us with that and all that stuff, then we're really not paying attention to, you know, in some ways the most important aspect of it. And just a reminder, everyone, I mean, you can take trees, harvest trees and turn them into timber, but that only sequesters, holds on to that carbon for a limited amount of time. So turning our forests into homes or whatever buildings is not such a great thing in itself. I mean, if you're doing it, well, next, we got an example here. So here's a great example. So Timber Age Systems, this is a local outfit. That's Kyle Hansen there. He's been the lead on that. Kyle has gotten some USD money to get this rolling. But I think Kyle is, he's a guy looking for the sweet spot, okay? So how do we blend all these things together for the most, you know, as I've talked to many times here on this presentation, the most beneficial outcome. So what Kyle's working on here is pretty gosh darn cool, he and his team. And so Kyle's making cross-laminated panels. I think they're 4 feet by 10 feet. And if you look in that back wall there, you'll see that he's actually using beetle-killed lumber to do that. And these are meant to be structural panels, right? So you know, just not like beautifying your wall, but structural panels. I think those timbers, if you look there, look like they're beetle kill wood as well. And if you catch beetle kill early enough, you can use it for structural material. So Kyle's trying to look for, trying to solve this deal of what do you do with the biomass in places where you need to clean it, take it off the forest to, for safety sakes, as far as the WUI goes, to maybe pull some of the, to decrease the density in the forest, take out some of the beetle kill wood, trees, etc. So, and then he's like, well, let's take that, we make a product of it. And he's working on this, and it's cool. He's partnering with Fort Lewis College on some of the engineering pieces of it and the load bearing, capabilities of these products. And then Kyle's going the next deal of like, wow, can we turn this into low cost housing solution? Can we hire people? This is like good thinking, as far as how we can find a sweet spot. And anyway, just want to shout out to Kyle for doing a good job of trying to bring things together. Next. So I think we got fallacies here, and this is maybe the next to last slide here, but I just have to address a few of these things that come up and need to be smacked down every now and then, frankly. So there's people who advocate that we need to be out there and treat or manage every acre. And let's just be straight, it's not possible, right? I mean, it's not possible from a resource management capacity wise, right? And there's also no need to, right? Much of the territory will just be taken care of its place. Trees live, trees die, they do their cycle, nutrients are cycled and so forth like that. It's all going to be okay. I mean, it's more when we get into some places where they're affecting our watershed and in the WUI and so forth that we have to make more attention. But, we need to target that. And this is what point I was making a second, Senator Hickenlooper last week, is that we need to target this, because if we're going in and doing forest treatments for wildfire mitigation, you just don't do that once and say goodbye, right? You got to return every few years and deal with it. So we can't take on too much territory. We have to be smart where we do it, how we do it, and we have to be able to fund it for a long period of time. And if we can make it carbon smart too, that we can take material off and turn into biochar, or like, a product such as Kyle's doing, I mean, that's good too. The other thing is that there's some advocacy for like, well, the less trees out there on the ground, the more water we're going to get. Well, it doesn't quite work like that, right? You don't slick the forest and get more water, which you end up with a whole drying landscape that loses its ability to be a sponge, which is the most important thing about a forest in many ways. It's to absorb the water and let it go later on. So if you open up a forest too much, it's just going to be a desiccated locale. That's not going to do its sponge thing. So, right, maybe we can take off some trees, but just not to supposedly create more water. But it might be some advantages, because it would be like, say, for Ponderosa, to reset it to its more natural condition, of more open forested condition than it is now. So anyway, don't think that we're going to slick the forest and suddenly have more water and fill up the reservoir. It's not going to happen. Of course, there's some people that think any kind of disturbance is bad, bad, bad. I know it's kind of embedded into our culture that that's the way things are, but these are natural processes. Some of them are hard, they're challenging. I've shed many tears over the 416 fire, but I also know, other than it being human caused, I mean, fires are natural events. Fuel breaks, that's kind of a real specific deal, but we can't fireproof our community. We can do things to reduce the hazard, but we can't, we're not going to build the wall, build the fuel break, whatever, to make that the case. The forest of dead trees is not necessarily tinderbox. Remember, it's what the conditions are, and you'd have to have ignition source and so forth. So in some forests, like lodgepole pine, you can actually, after the trees die and you have the needle drop, you have some decline in the hazard as far as fuels go, at least for some time. And then this deal that carbon sequestration is a minor side issue, as I pointed out before, it's super important that we pay attention to the carbon. Next. So winding up here, as I said, there's so much stuff to learn and do and follow and so forth like that. But these first 3 forest collaboratives, I've been involved in all of them since not the beginning of timing, but since the beginning of the partnerships. And they all have really good information on them. You can just do, the internet search and get them. So the San Juan Headwaters one is basically in the Pagosa area. Dolores one is in the Dolores district, and Montezuma, Dolores counties. Four Rivers is La Plata and San Juan counties. They have some overlapping information for sure. But the reason I point these out is that we try to pull in those and make some research available that is relevant to a local situation. And the dwarf one, we just finished doing a whole lot of work on where we're trying to go with the Ponderosa forest, what desired conditions are. It's a pretty exciting document. I should try to drop it into chat here, but you can find it on the website there. So, and then there's Colorado Forest Restoration Institute and Southwest Fire Science Consortium. There's a couple other ones. So there's a lot of great resources out here. And of course, I'm happy to act as a resource too, or point you in some way. If you can sign up for any of these organizations also to receive information on them. We do forest tours, we do workshops, a lot of opportunity to learn more about our forests in an organized way. And yeah, that's it. Oops, that was a long presentation. Sorry about that. I tried to talk as quickly as possible. So Marcel, do we have any questions I should work with here?
Yeah. And just to kind of thank everybody for coming out again. I think like a lot of staff at San Juan Citizens Alliance, once you get us going on our issue, it is hard for us to be brief, but that was a really great presentation. So thank you, Jimbo. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, or we can ask them now. And just thank you guys again. A lot of you I recognize as members, and thank you so much. We really can't do the work that we do without all of you. If you're curious about your kind of membership status, you can check in with us on that. Or if you have friends that you think would be interested in joining the Alliance to help support the issues that we work on, we'd really appreciate that too. So with that, I think we'll open it up to questions from folks. You can either drop it in the chat or just raise your hand. I'll stop sharing the screen now, so we can see everybody. And so, yeah, feel free to ask away. I think Jimbo and I can stay on a little bit past 6 o'clock if folks still have questions that run us past the hour, but we will not be offended if you have to jump off early. Don't worry about just logging out. But yeah, ask away.
This is very exciting. I see we have coast to coast membership and even an international call in here. So that's pretty fun. So anyway, I know that was a lot of sort of forestry 101 all crammed in there together, but yeah, questions, maybe just give us a hand raise and then give us a verbal question. Might be great if anyone has anything. Don't be shy.
Hello, Jimbo. Hey, nice to see you. Thanks for the presentation. I'm the international member of the audience here. Jimbo, so much of the work you do is based around science, and yet so much of it focuses on enabling people to make good decisions. What would be your biggest learning around working with people to collaborate to keep ecosystem function on the landscape and all the other good work that you're doing?
Super good question, Ray. I would say that despite the reality that we live in these forests, and they provide water and beauty and, ability to see wildlife. And I see a couple of my friends of mine here are hunters and so forth. Still, there's so much to know and understand about them and our kind of interplay interaction with them, and I would say that, keeping up on it and ever evolving and just knowing the basic science pieces are just really become kind of an imperative, for those of us who live in these landscapes. I'd say when I'm just out talking, meeting people and so forth like that, for example, many people don't know the basics of just those different forest types and what it means to have them, to live in them or have them as neighbors and so forth. So for example, like, we talked about prescribed fire, some people say, well, we have prescribed fire here, and I know they do that along the Ponderosa. Like, well, can't they do that like around Silverton in the spruce fir? So to reduce that hazard, like, well, no, that's not really how it works. That's not a fire adapted, forest. And so, I'm trying to understand those things. People have the basic understanding. I think that's a really important piece that we need to do, and I'd say one of the organizations I didn't call out, but is super cool organization around here is Wild Adapted Partnership. So Wildfire Adapted Partnership. So they are the outreach organization working with private homeowners on fire mitigation of their properties. And so there's a lead in Pagosa and here in the Durango area and Dolores. And those three gentlemen and their boss is Ashley Downing. Boy, they do a great job. I mean, there's so much to learn, information to share and so forth, and learn how, how we live here in the forest. I mean, sometimes it seems like people assume that like the forest moved into our neighborhood, but sorry, it's the other way around. We moved into the forest. So then how do we take responsibility, for that, And so anyway, I hope I answered your question, Ray, which is, like, there's just, a lot to learn. It's always changing. I'm the research is just, as I said before, thanks so much for the researchers who keep casting light and giving questions about what we need to address. In fact, when Senator Hickenlooper was here the other day, Hillary Cooper, who's the commissioner for San Miguel County, she responded to Senator Hickenlooper's question like, how can we help out? And she says, well, we really need to do some more research on the spruce fir. Like, what can we do in the spruce fir to, make our neighborhoods, our town, she's in the Telluride area, but in the greater area, how can we make those, is there any way we can mitigate for fire, at the same time, is there any way we can work with that for economic, benefit? And how do we put that all together? I mean, there's been a lot more research on state done on Ponderosa, and Ponderosa is kind of easy because it's fire adapted, right? Anyway, a little bit of a wandering answer there, but I think, just keep, the more we can learn, inform ourselves, teach our neighbors, and just know that, our forests are so integral to our lives here in Southwest Colorado, and really throughout the whole West, on up the coast into Alaska and so forth. They're just, forests are us, I guess you could say.
Great. We got another question here in chat from Julie Beer, and she's asking, are burnt trees being saved for woodpeckers that rely on burnt landscapes? And I will add one little anecdote here. I was hunting in the 416 burn scar last year, and the woodpeckers were going nuts in there. Didn't find any elk, but I found a lot of woodpeckers. So.
Well, I think, if I get your question, Julie, so here's the deal, like usually, like, especially around here, three-toed woodpeckers, come in after the fire when the trees are weak and the beetles are in there. And so they've been pretty happy, three-toed woodpeckers. I mean, I've only seen one or two here and there. And then last year I was up in a place and holy schmoly, I was standing in one place. I looked around, I counted 8 three-toed woodpeckers just from one sighting. So they're doing really well. So we don't need to worry about them. I think the real question, Julie, here is, can we train these three-toed woodpeckers? Can we train them to go get ahead of the head of the curve a little bit here? When there's first outbreak, you're like, oh, can all you woodpeckers go on over to so-and-so drainage and help us out here before it becomes, goes from endemic to epidemic. But the woodpeckers, from all my walk in the forest and so forth, they're some of the happiest and most prolific creatures out there right now.
It's great. Another question here from Susan Ostley. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And her question is, where is the cross-laminated panel facility located? And how accessible are their panels to those in other places?
Great question. And I have to say, I haven't even gotten a tour yet. And I've been pushing on Kyle and team for that. They're getting closer. I think to have a public opening so that their facility can be, their first buildings can be looked at. So all I can say is they're south of Durango. But I would say, watch either one of the collaboratives website or probably, either any of the newspapers in town so we can find more about that. They built their first building with it, and they've had it inspected, so it's to code. But that's where they are in the process now, and they're starting to hire more employees, and so I think they're just really kind of ramping up here with the whole effort. So we just have to be patient a little bit longer. And Kyle used to be the manager for Western Excelsior over in Mancos a long time before the facility burnt down. So he knows something about forest products industry and marketing and so forth like that. So it's I think it's going to go somewhere. We just need to be a little more patient here before it takes off. And then I think, some of his first work, when I talked to him last, will be looking at some project areas that he might work in with people who'd like to have him involved, and some of the stuff they're doing really cool right now. There was a discussion he had the other day with a certain HOA in the area who's thinning their property, and they're wondering, could we mill those logs, turn that into CLT and come back here and build a structure for us? Wow, that would be very, very local. You'd have the logs would have to travel, 20 miles one way and then turn into timber and then come back 20 miles the other way and be installed. So that'd be a very exciting model. That would be, no offense to Canadian timber, Ray, but that would be a much improved model.
Great. And then Jackie Mullen here is asking, how can someone who cares a lot about conservation but doesn't work in the industry volunteer at an entry level and get involved this summer?
That is a really good question. I think it depends on your interest in how to be being involved. I would say tune into either the Dwarf Collaborative out of Dolores or the San Juan Headwaters out of Pagosa, because they have a little more active tour groups and doing stuff in the field right now. So for example, one idea on that one is very cool thing going on with Weminuche Audubon Club out of Pagosa Springs is they are part of our monitoring program. So what's happening there is before any entry into the forest for any kind of mitigation or logging or anything like that, Audubon's going in and doing a bird baseline there. And then they're doing monitoring, which they've now been doing for a number of years, and keeping up on that. So if you're a birder, it's a great place to be involved and kind of paying attention to that. I think we're going to get some of that going over in the Dolores district as well. So we don't have, I'm not sure I'm be very helpful other than paying attention to the collaboratives, go to their meetings, seeing what opportunities might be. I think in some of our monitoring activities now, we're going to be able to have volunteers worked in again. So those are people who are going out on the landscape doing transects, counting, stems per acre, looking at height of trees, canopy, species composition, all those type of things, which we need to understand the forests. But certainly feel free to email me directly as a follow-up. But those are just some ideas on that one. I hope that's helpful.
Great. And then one kind of final comment here, which I think might kind of wrap us up pretty well. Wendy Gramadsky says, great presentation. It was well thought out and the content was easily understood. I learned so much about the various types of forests and look forward to identifying the forests around the retreat. She might need your help with that, Jimbo. So Wendy, you are more than welcome, I'm sure, to reach out to Jimbo. I don't want to speak for Jimbo, but we're always available to our members or just folks that are interested in this stuff. Yeah, Jimbo, any final thoughts for you before we maybe close things out here?
Well, I just, one other piece here. I just have to say when the word went out that I was scooping this month, we had a lot of comments from people who have questions having to do with another thing that I work on, which is recreational use of public lands, and numerous emails to that. So I'm thinking maybe we should visit that topic quite soon. I guess I'd like to reassure people that there are significant efforts going on in some great collaboration between county governments, Parks and Wildlife, Forest, San Juan Mountain Association, et cetera, having to do with stewardship, education, and so forth. There's a lot of work being done, but there are some very significant challenges. But maybe we'll schedule another session to talk about that, and I'd be happy to talk about our overall travel management work that we're doing. We've done for a long time, which a lot of it is focused on maintaining quiet areas and trail situated so they're not problematic for wildlife habitat and so forth like that. So maybe we'll circle back and do another whole program on that sometime, and that's a huge concern. I mean, it's great that so many people out there, so it's like, how do we make lemonade out of the lemons, which is if we can turn these people into informed public land users and protectors. I think that's the challenge we have. But it's going to take some patience as well as resources. But I just do know that there's a lot of people working really hard on this. I was at a Zoom meeting last fall with county commissioners from the 8 sort of mountain counties across Southwest Colorado, and federal officials, and it was a whole conversation of like what came down last year, what do we need to modify, how do we move ahead, etc., with some big thinking and some more detailed thinking. Yeah, definitely challenges. So anyway. Yeah, so I think, I'll wind up here, but feel free to email me, ring me. Probably easier to email me. I just want to say I appreciate people's support for the Alliance. As you can see, I work on a lot of issues. We try to keep paying attention to pretty much everything that's going on our federal public lands, and work for protective measures, ecological function support, and things like that. I mean, there's a little bit of light at the tunnel here with the change in administrations that we're going to start looking at some decisions that were made recently that, from a science-based background, were definitely errant. So we're hoping to pull some of those back in and take a look at them again. So that will be helpful. So thank you. And I see a couple of faces also on there, people I've had emails from recently. So I'll get back to you directly too. Maybe we can have a phone conversation, like Norman, I see you there, and Wendy as well. So we'll circle back on those two.
Great. Well, thank you again so much, Jimbo. And thanks to all of you. I did put Jimbo's email in the chat. So if you were curious how to get in touch with him, that's there. And we will be doing another monthly scoop from another area of our program work here next month. So the third Thursday of every month, we're going to continue to do these, kind of cycling through all of our different programs: forests, rivers, wildlife, energy issues. So we'll see you next month.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for honoring me with your presence.